Growing up, family reunions were the highlight of my year. The smell of barbecue cousins running around the backyard and that warm feeling of belonging somewhere special. But this year, something felt different. As I sat in my apartment in Denver, scrolling through social media, I realized everyone in my family was planning something I was not part of. The annual reunion was happening, and for the first time in 28 years, I was not invited. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button if you have ever felt left out by your own family, and subscribe because what happened next changed everything. But first, let me tell you about the shock I received that turned my world upside down. I should probably start by telling you about myself. My name is Lucy. I am 28 years old and I work as a marketing coordinator for a tech company here in Denver. I have been single for the past 3 years, choosing to focus on building my career after a pretty messy breakup. My family consists of my older brother Mason, who is 32 and married with 2 kids, my younger sister Sophia, who is 25 and just graduated law school, and my parents Robert and Patricia. My dad Robert is a retired engineer who spent most of his career working on infrastructure projects across Colorado. He is the kind of man who measures twice and cuts once methodical in everything he does. My mom, Patricia, taught elementary school for 30 years before retiring last year. She has this way of organizing everything and everyone around her, which usually works great for family gatherings. Every year since I can remember, our family has gathered at my grandmother Dorothy's ranch in East Texas for our reunion. Grandma Dorothy is 90 years old and still sharp as a tack. The ranch has been in our family for 4 generations, and these gatherings are sacred to us. We would spend 3 days catching up, sharing stories, and reinforcing those family bonds that keep us connected despite living in different states. The reunions usually happen in late September when the Texas heat finally starts to break and the evenings become pleasant. We would set up tables under the old oak trees, string lights between the branches, and spend hours talking about everything and nothing. Mason would bring his wife Jennifer, and their kids Sophia would update everyone on her latest academic achievements, and I would usually share stories about work or whatever guy I happened to be dating at the time. This year felt different from the beginning. Usually, Mom would start planning in July, sending group texts and coordinating who was bringing what food. But August came and went without a single mention of the reunion. When September arrived, I finally decided to ask Mason directly. I called him on a Tuesday evening expecting our usual casual conversation. Instead, he sounded nervous and distracted. When I brought up the reunion, there was this uncomfortable pause before he said, "Oh, Mom will probably call you about that soon." Something in his voice made my stomach drop. Mason and I have always been close. He never dodged questions like that. 2 days later, Patricia called me. Her voice had that overly cheerful tone she uses when she is about to deliver bad news. "Lucy, honey, I need to talk to you about this year's reunion." She went on to explain that they were keeping it smaller this year, that money was tight after some unexpected expenses, and that Grandma Dorothy was not feeling up to hosting a big crowd. I wanted to believe her explanation. I really did. But something felt off about the whole conversation. When I asked specific questions about the dates or who would be attending, Mom became vague and started talking about how we could plan a separate visit for me later in the year. By the end of the call, I felt confused and hurt, but I tried to convince myself that maybe they really were just trying to keep things low-key. The truth hit me like a truck exactly 1 week later. I was having coffee with my college friend Emma, who has become close with my family over the years. She has joined us for several reunions and holidays, and my parents absolutely adore her. We were chatting about work and life when she casually mentioned how excited she was about seeing everyone at the ranch next weekend. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean, seeing everyone at the ranch?" Emma's face immediately went pale. "Oh my God, Lucy! I thought you knew. Your mom invited me to the reunion. She said—" Emma trailed off, clearly realizing she had just stepped into something messy. She said what I pressed. Emma looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. She mentioned that they wanted me to come because they had someone they wanted me to meet. And they thought it might be nice if you had a friend there when you met James, who is apparently Patricia's friend's son. They were hoping you two might hit it off. The pieces suddenly fell into place with devastating clarity. My family had not excluded me because of budget concerns or space limitations. They had excluded me because they saw me as a project that needed fixing. In their minds, I was the broken single daughter who required intervention, and they were so embarrassed by my situation that they could not even include me in the planning of my own setup. I sat there in that coffee shop, watching Emma apologize repeatedly, and felt something inside me break. This was not about money or space or Grandma Dorothy feeling tired. This was about my family looking at my life and deciding it was not good enough. They would rather orchestrate some elaborate matchmaking scheme than simply accept me as I am. The worst part was realizing that everyone knew. Mason knew, Sophia knew, even Emma knew the real reason I was being excluded. They had all discussed my sad single life and agreed that something needed to be done about it. The family reunion I had been looking forward to all year was actually an intervention disguised as a celebration. That evening, I made a decision. I was not going to call my parents and demand an explanation. I was not going to start a family fight over the phone. Instead, I was going to focus on my work, ignore the reunion completely, and pretend that this whole situation did not bother me. But deep down, I was angrier than I had ever been in my life, and that anger was only going to grow stronger. The weekend of the reunion arrived, and I tried my best to stay busy. I deep cleaned my apartment, caught up on work projects, and even started reading a novel I had been putting off for months. But despite my efforts to distract myself, I found myself constantly checking social media watching as my family members posted updates from the ranch. Mason posted a picture of him and Dad working on some fence repairs with a caption about keeping the family traditions alive. Sophia shared a story about helping Grandma Dorothy organize old photo albums in the house. Even Jennifer posted pictures of their kids playing in the same tire swing I used to love as a child. Each post felt like a small stab to my heart, but the post that really broke me came from Emma. She shared a picture of the entire family gathered around the dinner table under those oak trees I had described to David so many times. There was Mom, Dad, Mason, Jennifer, the kids, Sophia, Grandma, Dorothy, and Emma herself, all smiling and looking like the perfect, happy family. The only person missing from that picture was me. I stared at that image for probably 10 minutes, zooming in on each face, looking for any sign that someone missed me or felt bad about my absence. But everyone looked genuinely happy and relaxed. It was as if my presence had never been necessary for their joy in the first place. That same evening, Sophia called me. She opened the conversation with this artificially bright voice, asking how my weekend was going and what I had been up to. She talked about work, about some guy she had been seeing, about everything, except the obvious fact that she was calling me from the family reunion I had not been invited to. Finally, I could not take it anymore. Sophia, why are you calling me? I just wanted to check in with my sister. Is that not allowed? You are calling me from the reunion I was not invited to, so forgive me if I find your timing a little strange. There was a long pause before Sophia said, Lucy, you know how Mom and Dad are. They just want what is best for you. That phrase, what is best for you, confirmed everything I had suspected. My family had genuinely convinced themselves that excluding me was an act of love. They believed that my single status was a problem that required their intervention, and they were willing to hurt me in order to solve it. I spent Sunday morning feeling sorry for myself, but by Sunday afternoon, something inside me had shifted. I was tired of being treated like a charity case. I was tired of my family making decisions about my life without consulting me. Most importantly, I was tired of feeling ashamed about being single when there was absolutely nothing wrong with my life. That shift in perspective was perfectly timed because Sunday evening brought the biggest surprise of my life. David, the man I had been dating for 8 months, had planned what I thought was a casual dinner at our favorite restaurant. We had met through work when his architecture firm was hired to design a new office space for my company. David is 33, thoughtful, funny, and completely different from any man I had dated before. Where my previous boyfriends had been impulsive and dramatic, David was steady and genuine. He had chosen a rooftop restaurant with a stunning view of the Rocky Mountains, and I remember thinking it was a beautiful way to end a difficult weekend. We had just finished our main course when David started acting nervous, fidgeting with his napkin and stumbling over his words. "Lucy, these past 8 months have been the best of my life," he began. "You make me laugh every day, you challenge me to be better, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Before I fully processed what was happening, David was on one knee beside our table holding the most beautiful ring I had ever seen. "Will you marry me?" The entire restaurant seemed to stop and watch as I sat there completely stunned. This man who had brought so much stability and joy into my life was asking me to spend forever with him, and he was doing it on the exact weekend when my family had decided I was too pathetic and single to include in their celebration. "Yes," I whispered, and then louder, "Yes, absolutely, yes." As David slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt this incredible surge of happiness mixed with something else entirely. I felt powerful. Here I was achieving one of the biggest milestones of my life, and my family was not even aware it was happening. They were too busy trying to set me up with some stranger to realize that I had already found my person. David had been planning this proposal for 2 months. He had chosen this particular weekend because he knew how much family meant to me, and he wanted to propose when I would be thinking about our future together and the family we would create. The irony was almost too much to handle. As we celebrated with champagne and called his parents to share the news, I made a decision that surprised even me. I looked at my new engagement ring, thought about my family sitting around that dinner table without me, and said, "David, how do you feel about a road trip to Texas?" "Tonight?" he asked, clearly confused. "Right now. I want to share our news with my family, and I want to do it in person." David, bless him, did not ask too many questions. He could see that this was important to me, and he was willing to support whatever I needed. We went back to my apartment, threw some clothes in a bag, and started the 4-hour drive to East Texas. As we drove through the darkness, I explained the whole situation to David. I told him about being excluded from the reunion, about the matchmaking scheme, and about how hurt and angry I had been feeling. David listened without judgment, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand or ask clarifying questions. "I cannot wait to meet them," he said as we crossed the Texas state line, "and I cannot wait for them to see how amazing you are." That comment made me realize something important. David saw my worth clearly without any need for improvement or intervention. He loved me exactly as I was, single status and all. My family could learn something from his perspective. We arrived at Grandma Dorothy's ranch just as the family was gathering for Sunday evening dinner. I could see them all through the kitchen windows, moving around and preparing food, completely unaware that their carefully planned reunion was about to be disrupted. David parked his car next to Mason's truck, and we sat there for a moment looking at the warm lights and listening to the sound of laughter coming from inside the house. This was the first time I had ever arrived at the ranch uninvited, and I felt nervous in a way I had never experienced before. "You ready for this?" David asked, taking my hand. I looked down at my engagement ring, gathering courage from its presence on my finger. "Let's do this." We walked up the front porch steps and knocked on the door. Mason answered, and the expression on his face was priceless. His eyes went wide, his mouth dropped open, and he actually took a step backward. "Lucy, what are you doing here?" "Hello to you too, brother. This is David, my fiancé. We came to share some exciting news with the family." I pushed past Mason into the living room where everyone was gathered. Dad was sitting in his usual chair reading a newspaper. Mom was arranging flowers in a vase. Sophia was curled up on the couch with a book. Emma was helping Grandma Dorothy set the dinner table. And there, sitting awkwardly on the far side of the room, was a young man I did not recognize who was obviously the infamous James. The room fell completely silent when they saw us. Patricia dropped the flower she was holding. Robert looked up from his newspaper with confusion written all over his face. Sophia actually gasped out loud. Emma looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. And James, poor James, clearly realized he was witnessing some kind of family drama he had not signed up for. "Lucy, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" Patricia asked, her voice shaking slightly. "I came to introduce everyone to my fiancé and share our engagement news," I said, holding up my left hand so everyone could see the ring. "David proposed tonight, and I thought our family should be the first to know." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as my family members exchanged glances, clearly trying to figure out how to respond to this unexpected turn of events. The irony was not lost on any of us that they had excluded me from a family gathering in order to help me find a husband, and I had arrived already engaged to a wonderful man they had never met. David, sensing the tension in the room, stepped forward with his characteristic grace. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, I have heard so much about all of you. I am sorry we are dropping in unannounced, but Lucy was excited to share our news, and I was eager to meet her family." Grandma Dorothy was the first to break the awkward silence. "Well, I will be damned," she said with a smile. "Lucy found herself a good-looking man without any help from the rest of us." That comment broke some of the tension, and Dad stood up to shake David's hand. "Congratulations, son, and welcome to the family." But I was not ready to let this moment pass without addressing the elephant in the room. I had driven 4 hours to have this conversation, and I was going to make the most of it. Before we start celebrating, I said, "I think we need to talk about why I was not invited to this reunion in the first place." Patricia opened her mouth to speak, probably to repeat her story about budget constraints and limited space, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Mom, I know the real reason. Emma told me about the matchmaking plan. I know that you excluded me because you thought I needed fixing, and I know that you were embarrassed by my single status." The room became uncomfortable again, but this time I was not going to let the discomfort derail the conversation. "I want everyone in this room to understand something," I continued. "I am 28 years old. I have a successful career, I own my own home, I have great friends, and I am perfectly capable of managing my own love life. The fact that I was single does not mean I was broken or in need of your intervention." James, who had been sitting quietly through this entire exchange, suddenly stood up. "I think I should probably go," he said. "This seems like a family conversation." "Actually, James, I am glad you are here," I said, "because I want you to understand that I had no idea about any of this. My family arranged this setup without consulting me, and I would never want you to feel awkward about their poor judgment." James nodded gratefully and made his exit, leaving our family to deal with the mess they had created. Sophia was the first family member to speak up. "Lucy, I wanted you here. I told Mom and Dad this whole plan was a mistake, but they would not listen to me." That admission hit me harder than I expected. Sophia had tried to advocate for me, but she had been overruled by our parents. Mason cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology, Lucy. When Mom told me about excluding you, I should have said something. I was a coward, and I am sorry." Even Emma chimed in. "I should have told you what was happening as soon as I found out. I was trying not to cause drama, but I realize now that I made things worse." But the people I most needed to hear from were my parents, and they were both sitting quietly, looking ashamed and uncomfortable. Finally, Dad spoke up. "Lucy, your mother and I thought we were helping. We worry about you being alone, and when Patricia's friend mentioned that James was looking to meet someone, it seemed like a good opportunity. But excluding me from our family reunion was not helping Dad. It was hurtful and disrespectful." Mom finally found her voice. "You are right. We handled this all wrong. We should have talked to you directly if we had concerns instead of making decisions behind your back. I am sorry, Lucy. I am truly sorry. Looking around the room at my family members, I could see genuine remorse in their faces. They had made a terrible mistake, but they were acknowledging it and taking responsibility. I appreciate the apologies, I said, but I need you all to understand that this cannot happen again. You do not get to make decisions about my life without including me in the conversation. And you definitely do not get to exclude me from family gatherings because you disapprove of my choices. Grandma Dorothy, who had been listening quietly to this entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. Lucy has always been the strongest one in this family. She gets that from me. And anyone who cannot see that she is perfectly fine, just the way she is, needs to get their eyes checked. That comment from my 90-year-old grandmother, delivered with her characteristic bluntness, seemed to settle something in the room. David, who had been standing quietly beside me throughout this conversation, put his arm around my waist. "If it helps," he said, "I fell in love with Lucy exactly as she was when I met her. She did not need fixing or improving. She was perfect." The rest of that evening unfolded in ways I never could have predicted. After the initial shock and difficult conversation, my family gradually shifted into celebration mode. Mom brought out champagne she had been saving for a special occasion, and Dad started asking David about his work and his intentions toward me. Sophia pulled me aside for a private conversation, apologizing again for not speaking up more forcefully against the exclusion plan. "I was scared to challenge Mom and Dad," she admitted, "but watching you stand up to them tonight made me realize I need to find my own voice in this family." Mason and his wife Jennifer spent time getting to know David, and I could see them genuinely warming up to him. Jennifer later told me that she was impressed by how David supported me during the confrontation without trying to take over or minimize my feelings. Even Emma, who had been caught in the middle of this whole mess, seemed relieved that everything was finally out in the open. "I hated knowing something you did not know," she told me. "It felt like lying, even though I was trying to protect everyone's feelings." As the evening progressed, my family invited David and me to stay for the remainder of the reunion. Part of me wanted to decline to make them feel the consequences of their actions a little longer, but another part of me recognized that they were genuinely trying to make amends, and that staying might be the first step toward rebuilding our relationships on better terms. We ended up spending 2 more days at the ranch, and those days taught me a lot about family dynamics and forgiveness. David fit in seamlessly with my family, helping Dad with ranch chores, listening to Grandma Dorothy's stories about the old days, and charming Mom with his appreciation for her cooking. But the most important conversations happened between me and my parents. We spent hours talking about their fears for my future, my frustration with their lack of faith in my choices, and how we could communicate better going forward. "I think we got scared when you hit your late 20s and were still single," Mom explained during one of these talks. "When we were your age, most people were already married with children. We worried that you were missing out on something important." "But my timeline does not have to look like yours," I replied. "And even if I had stayed single forever, that would have been my choice to make." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "We realize now that our fears said more about our own insecurities than about your life." "You have built something really impressive for yourself, Lucy. We should have been celebrating that instead of worrying about what was missing." These conversations were not always easy, but they were necessary. For the first time in years, I felt like my parents were actually listening to me instead of just waiting for their turn to give advice. The night before David and I left to return to Denver, Grandma Dorothy asked to speak with me privately. We sat together on her front porch looking out at the stars that are so much brighter in rural Texas than they are in the city. "Your grandfather and I were married for 62 years, she said. "And in all that time, the most important thing I learned was that love is not about fixing someone or changing them. It is about accepting them exactly as they are and supporting them as they grow into who they want to become." She patted my hand with her weathered fingers. "That young man of yours understands that." and so do you. That is why this is going to work. 6 months later, as David and I planned our wedding, I reflected on how much had changed since that difficult weekend. My relationships with my family members were stronger than they had ever been, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect that had not existed before. The reunion incident forced us to have conversations we had been avoiding for years. Sophia started standing up for herself more in family discussions, and she even brought her own boyfriend to Christmas dinner without asking for anyone's approval first. Mason began including me more in family decisions, recognizing that I had valuable perspectives to offer. And my parents learned to ask questions about my life instead of making assumptions about what I needed. David and I got married the following September, with our ceremony held under those same oak trees at Grandma Dorothy's ranch. The whole family was involved in the planning, but this time I was in control of the decisions. It felt like a beautiful full circle moment, celebrating love and commitment in the place where I had finally learned to stand up for myself. The experience also changed how I approached other relationships in my life. I became more willing to have difficult conversations with friends and colleagues when I felt disrespected or misunderstood. I learned that advocating for myself was not selfish or confrontational. It was necessary for building authentic connections with other people. At work, I started speaking up more in meetings and pursuing projects that excited me instead of just accepting whatever assignments came my way. My confidence in my personal life translated into confidence in my professional life, and I received a promotion 6 months after the engagement. But perhaps the most important lesson I learned was about the difference between love and control. My family's actions had come from a place of love, but they had expressed that love through attempts to control my choices. Real love, I realized, means trusting the people you care about to make their own decisions, even when those decisions make you nervous. David and I built our relationship on that principle from the beginning. We support each other's goals and dreams, but we do not try to fix each other or push each other toward predetermined outcomes. When challenges arise, we face them together as partners, not as a project manager and a client. The reunion incident also taught me about the importance of chosen family alongside biological family. Emma remained one of my closest friends, and our relationship actually grew stronger after she saw how I handled conflict with grace and determination. David's family welcomed me warmly, and I gained a whole new set of people who accepted me exactly as I was from day one. Looking back, I realized that being excluded from that reunion was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It forced me to confront patterns in my family relationships that had been bothering me for years, but that I had never addressed directly. It gave me the opportunity to practice standing up for myself in a high-stakes situation, and it led to a level of honesty and authenticity in my family relationships that we never would have achieved otherwise. The story could have ended very differently. I could have accepted the exclusion quietly and allowed my family to continue making decisions about my life without my input. I could have attended the reunion as planned and allowed myself to be set up, with James sacrificing my own agency to keep the peace. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your relationships is to demand better treatment, even when that demand creates temporary discomfort. Now, when young women ask me for advice about family relationships or standing up for themselves, I always tell them that sometimes you have to show up uninvited to claim your rightful place at the table. Not everyone will welcome your presence initially, but the people who truly love you will eventually recognize your worth and adjust their behavior accordingly. The engagement ring that started this whole adventure now sits beside my wedding band, and every time I look at it, I remember that night when David saw my value clearly while my family was struggling to understand it. But I also remember the growth and healing that followed, and how much stronger all of our relationships became once we learned to communicate with honesty and respect. Family relationships are complicated, and they require constant work and attention. But when that work is done with love and mutual respect, the results can be more beautiful than anything you originally imagined possible. Have you ever had to stand up to your family or demand better treatment in an important relationship, I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about love, family, and finding your voice. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment, and remember that your worth is not determined by other people's opinions or expectations. Thank you for listening, and I hope you find the courage to claim your own seat at whatever table matters most to you.